April 16, 1992, and this will be the second underground interview with Al Bielek, coming to you directly from the American Academy of Discipline Sciences. Al, would you summarize for our viewers, very briefly, for these that have not seen your first underground tape, what was the Philadelphia experiment and what was your part in it? Because all of our discussion in this second interview would be about what happened later and about some other projects that basically have not been commented about so far.
Okay, very briefly, the Philadelphia experiment was a project undertaken by the Navy during the war years, which had its early and original genesis in 1931 in Chicago, was moved to the Institute of Advanced Studies in 1934 in Princeton, New Jersey. And by 1940, they had a functional test which proved they could produce invisibility on a Navy ship. That was Rainbow 1. They classified it and they made it a project called Project Rainbow. In March of 42, with Nikola Tesla having been the director since 34, he was to have a test of invisibility on a battleship. He deliberately sabotaged it because he refused to be responsible for the loss of life which he expected due to the extremely high electromagnetic power and energies involved to produce the invisibility effect. So the Neumann took over, and in 1943, after a lot of preparation in mid to late 42 and 43, they held their first test on July 22nd, 43, which was fully successful. The ship became invisible to radar as well as to the sight and to a camera. But they had some personnel problems, not super bad, but nevertheless those on deck were nauseous and ill and had to be removed after the ship returned to dock. The final test was 12 August 1943, and that one was a total disaster. After it disappeared and remained in hyperspace for some 4 hours by linear measured time in 1943, it returned, and there were some crew members missing, others on fire, and all those on deck were crazy, insane, except myself, who had just come back. And from that point on, the Navy, after one more aborted test late in October, washed their hands of the entire thing and scrapped the project and sent the Elvis to sea as a regular destroyer after re-outfitting it. Now, the project was dropped in 43 due to the very bad and disastrous results. And in 47, it was taken up again at the request of the Navy. Dr. von Neumann was asked to look into it and see if he could find out what really went wrong and if anything could be salvaged. He did find what went wrong, and since he was already working on a computer design from 1946 at the Institute of Advanced Study, he continued his work. The computer designs were completed in 1952. The first model was built, the second one went to England, and I think the third went to the Navy Department in 1953 with a totally new design, having been working on several projects simultaneously. They had a final test with the Navy on a totally new project in which there was no personnel interaction. They had full invisibility, radar, and optical, and everybody was happy because there was no problem. So then we classified the project again and called it Project Phoenix. And that name, code name, Project Phoenix, became the genesis and the coverall for a multitude of sins and a multitude of projects which the government shoveled under that umbrella. We had everything from mind control projects to invisibility project, that is a continuation of the Philadelphia experiment, to time travel problems and time travel systems and time tunnels and attempts at crossbreeding humans with reptilians and a few other little strange things all came under that umbrella. So that is very basically and very quickly what happened with the Philadelphia project. The Philadelphia experiment, as it was called, was a disaster because it locked up with the Phoenix project, which was running through 1977 to 83, but in the last month of its running, the last 12 days in August, from August 1 to August 12, the Phoenix project was online continuously without let-up. And on the 12th of August, 1983, the two projects locked up, pulled the Eldridge into hyperspace, where it remained for some 4 hours by standard measured linear time.
On deck or on Earth?
Yeah, out in hyperspace. It was not on Earth.
Yeah.
It was in a limbo condition. And Duncan and I were running the equipment on board the Eldridge. When we saw that it was totally uncontrollable and out of control and we couldn't shut it off, we jumped overboard and wound up in 1983 at the Phoenix Project. Stayed there about half a day, and we were sent back to the Eldridge to smash the equipment. We returned the ship to 1943. While this was coming out of the fields in the fog, and the equipment was running down because enough was destroyed that nothing would run anymore. As the field started to dissipate, we found, of course, 4 men buried in steel as we went out on deck again, and a 5th man with his hand in the steel bulkhead, and a lot of other insanity all over the place, everyone running around totally in gibberish, insane. Some of the guys were burning, some were disappearing and reappearing, and it was a total disaster. Duncan took one look at this, jumped overboard, went to 1983, as later record showed, and that was before the fields totally collapsed. He was still able to get back. He didn't want any part of what he saw. The real reason for that, why he deserted ship, so to speak, and went back to the future, no pun intended on the movie, has been a subject of debate now for some 6 years, since we became aware of the interlocking projects. Actually, from about 88 onward, why did he return to 83? The best answer I've been able to come up with was the fact that in the period of 1943, between the first and the second test of the Eldridge, then the Chief of Naval Operations, who was Admiral King, issued an order, which I found out about in the last few months, to the effect that if the second test was a failure, nobody was to leave the Eldridge alive. In other words, he proposed to kill everybody. Well, this was interdicted by a higher level order from the highest level in the Navy, which was the Secretary of the Navy, then James Forrestal, who countermanded the order. Duncan apparently knew about the original order, and I suspect did not know about the second order, and jumped overboard in a panic, thinking we're all doomed anyway. And he looked at me before he jumped overboard like, well, aren't I coming along? I didn't. It changed, in many respects, history, and definitely changed our personal history. Duncan was reborn later in 1951 in another body, and after he went through many escapades with the military and the Air Force from the time of age 18, which was 1978 onward,